Hello, my name is Ryan Gottfredson, and I'm the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author of the book Success Mindsets and also the book The Elevated Leader. And one of my personal missions is to help people to become better, like truly become better. And I want to share with you some ideas that I think will help give you clarity on how you can become better. Now, to step into this, I think one of the things that's helpful for us to understand is that there are two sides of ourselves. There is, as you can see, the doing side. This is our talent, our knowledge, our skills, our abilities. There's also our being side. This is our character, our psyche, our conscientiousness, our mindsets. It's really ultimately our internal operating system. Now, I think one of the things that we oftentimes neglect is this being side, but that is core to us becoming better. If we want to become better, we've got to elevate along our being side. But most people aren't super familiar with our being side. So I want to share with you 3 characteristics that distinguish whether or not somebody is high or low on their being side. So let me dive into this quickly and then we'll back into them again. So I'm going to identify 3 things. Here's the first one. It's our window of tolerance. People who are higher on their being side have a wider window of tolerance. People who are lower on their being side have a more narrow window of tolerance. What that means is that these people with more narrow windows of tolerance, they're more likely to be triggered by things that occur in their environment, which sends them either into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, meaning they move into fight, flight, or freeze responses because of their environment. Now, we've all been thrown outside of our window of tolerance. This is going to happen to all of us. But what we know is that people higher on their being side have a wider window of tolerance. They're able to tolerate more stress, pressure, maybe getting feedback or constructive criticism without kind of losing control of their emotions. Does that make sense? All right, so that's the first factor, window of tolerance. The second one is emotional intelligence. Those higher on their being side are more emotionally intelligent than those lower on their being side. This means that they have a greater ability to be aware and regulate their own emotions, as well as be aware of others' emotions and navigate those others' emotions effectively. So that's the second element. The third element is our mindsets. Those people that are higher on their being side have more value-creating mindsets, growth, open, promotion, and outward mindsets. Those lower on their being side have more self-protective mindsets, meaning they're fixed, close, prevention, and inward mindsets. Now, I think one of the things that's interesting about this is we could ask ourselves the question, what causes people to have more narrow windows of tolerance, lower emotional intelligence, and more self-protective mindsets? Well, actually, research has found is that there is a factor that impacts all 3 of these things. Now, if we have more narrow window of tolerance, lower emotional intelligence, or more self-protective mindsets, which I've been there, doesn't necessarily suggest that we've had what I'm about to tell you about. But the odds are is it's probably playing a role. Now, what I'm talking about, this factor that seems to impact all 3 of these things, is psychological trauma. So what is psychological trauma? Well, I love just the simple definition of its psychological wounding. Now, I think one of the things that's helpful for us to understand is that psychological trauma is not what happens to us. It is actually our body's response to what happens to us. In fact, so for example, not many people would say that missing a flight was a traumatic experience. But I would also say I've missed a flight when I shouldn't have because of my negligence. And that's actually made me more anxious whenever I go to an airport. So this was an experience that I had that on surface doesn't seem too traumatic. But what I know is that it has altered my body's nervous system. It has made me more anxious in a space, in a context that I really wasn't anxious with before. Now, let me help you to better understand psychological trauma and how it's connected to these 3 things. How it's connected to our window of tolerance, our emotional intelligence and the quality and sophistication of our mindsets. Now, our body has a stress response system. It is awesome. It is designed to help us to absorb stress in a healthy way. So for example, if you ever do this hike, which is one of my favorite hikes, it's Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, you're gonna come to this spot in the hike and it is about, 20, 25 feet wide, and it is sheer cliffs on either side. Now, whenever we're in this environment, our heart is going to start to race, our pulse quickens up, our hands start to get sweaty, right? What's going on is our body's stress response system is kicking in because it's designed to help us to survive, right? And that's awesome. We want this. Now, normally, our body's stress response system allows our body to regulate after we proceed through a stressful experience. Great. But trauma occurs when the stress of that situation exceeds our body's capacity to deal with that stress. And when this happens, our body has to take rather drastic measures to limit the pain and the suffering associated with that situation. And it is these drastic consequences or adaptations to our body's nervous system that is trauma. So again, trauma is not what occurs to us, it's our body's response to the things that occur to us. So what are these drastic measures? Well, again, when trauma occurs, our body's nervous system, or what I often call our internal operating system, becomes programmed more for self-protection. In fact, in order to understand this, we need to understand that we have 3 different brain regions in our brain that controls our executive function. These are our regulators of our internal operating system. There's the default mode network, the salience network, and the central executive network. Now, the default mode network is control of our non-conscious processing. Salience network is in control of our emotions, and the central executive network is in control of our cognitive processing. Now, when these brain networks work effectively together, we are more regulated and we're able to encode our world more accurately. Now, but when we experience trauma or as something that causes our body's nervous system to become more self-protective, what's going on is it's affecting at least the relationship between 2 of these brain networks, the default mode network and the salience network. In fact, there's 2 common neural adaptations that our bodies will take on after we experience trauma. And these adaptations will exist or persist after the traumatic experience until we engage in the work of healing. So let me walk you through these 2 neural adaptations. And then we'll connect this back to the 3 different differentiators along our being side. So the first adaptation is when the salience network becomes really strong and the default mode network isn't able to regulate it the way it normally would. Now, what this is called is hypervigilance. Our emotions are more prone to run rampant. We struggle to regulate and control our emotions, and we prioritize our own overly sensitive emotions above others' emotions. That's hypervigilance. The second adaptation is what's called dissociation. This is when the default mode network becomes stronger and it doesn't allow the salience network to kick on, meaning that it cuts off this emotion. It's again a self-protective mechanism because we've probably been hurt in the past. And one of the ways our body allows us to avoid the pain associated with trauma is let's just cut off the feelings altogether. And that's what dissociation is. Now, if we're dissociated, we struggle to connect with and be aware of our emotions, and we have reduced skill for effectively navigating others' emotions. Now, of course, we've got a range here. Some people could be more hypervigilant than others. Also, some people could be more dissociated than others. So both of these adaptations come together to affect our being side. Let's talk about emotional intelligence first. So if these are the kind of the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, what we can learn from this is that people who are more hypervigilant have a harder time with self-management, regulating their emotions. And because they're so focused on their emotions, they're not able to be as aware of others' emotions as would ideally be the case. And people who are dissociated, on the other hand, have a hard time connecting to their own emotions. And if we have a hard time connecting to our own emotions and kind of navigating those, we're going to have a hard time navigating others' emotions. So these are two neural adaptations that impact or impede our emotional intelligence levels, therefore impacting how high we are along our being side. Similarly with windows of tolerance, what we've learned is that people who are more hypervigilant or dissociated have more narrow windows of tolerance, particularly those who are more hypervigilant, right? They are more likely or more prone to be sent outside of their window of tolerance. And then third, we can look at mindsets. People who have experienced more trauma, they go through these adaptations as a way to protect themselves, which causes them to adopt these more self-protective mindsets of fixed, closed, prevention, and inward. And so I don't know where your mind's at when talking about trauma as it relates to this. Maybe you're thinking, well, I don't think I have trauma in my background. I know that that's all I thought a few years ago. I've discovered differently. But the reality is that most of us have experienced trauma to the degree that it has negatively impacted our body's nervous system in one of these ways. It is estimated at least 70% of adults have experienced trauma to the degree that it negatively impacts their body's nervous system. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means that if we want to become better, if we want to elevate along our being side, if we want to develop a wider window of tolerance, greater emotional intelligence, or more value-creating mindsets, at the end of the day, we've got to heal. We've got to heal our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. And it's not until we do that will we become better. So I imagine if you're anything like me, you need some healing in your life. And healing is not a short-term thing. It's a lifelong thing. It's a lifelong process to elevate along our being side. But I know that if you could focus on healing from your past trauma, you can become more of the person that you want to become. I know that's been a part of my journey, and I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to help others progress along that same journey. And hopefully this helps you. Thanks.